Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello dear student, again literary criticism, chapter number 2, a historical survey of literary criticism. Today we will continue this chapter number 2, but before we go to chapter number 2, let me remind you to a previous lecture, if you remember, that we talked about Plato and Aristotle, Sir Philip Sidney, John Dryden. We took together also about their masterpieces, work, and poetics style. So today we will continue with this content as you see here. So first of all, we will talk, or I'll give you John Dryden 1631 up to 17th. Also, I'll give you William Wordsworth 1770 until or up to 1850. Then we will also talk about the P.B. Shelley 1792 up to 1822. Then we will also talk about Matthew Arnold in 1822 up to 1888. Finally, we will talk about modern literary criticism. So here, the first section here in chapter number 2 also, John Dryden, as you see, we will now talk about John Dryden, poet, laureate, dramatist, and a critic. So what does it mean here? That Dryden brought literary criticism out of the church and into the coffee house. Now, if I want to talk about Dryden was English poet, exactly literary critic, also translator, and we can say and the playwright who was appointed England's first poet laureate in about 1668. So John Dryden he is seen as dominating the literary life of Restoration's England to such a point that the period came to be known in literary circles as the Age of Dryden. So Romanticist writer Sir Walter Scott called him Glorious John. So this is about the something of the John Dryden. So another thing, T.S. Eliot, the great 20th century poet and essayist, asserts that Dryden wrote the first serious literary criticism in English by an English poet, and also Dryden's lasting contributions to literary criticism, an essay of dramatic poesy in 1668, highlights his genius. So, what Dryden achieved in his poetry was neither the emotional excitements of the early 19th century romantics nor the intellectual complexities of the metaphysical. He is, his subject's matter was often factual, and he aimed to expressing his thought in the most precise and concentrated manner. Although we can say that he uses formal structures such as heroic couplets, he tried to recreate the natural rhythm of speech, and also he knew that different subjects need different kinds of verbs. So in his preface to Religio Lycis, he says that the expressions of a poem designed purely for instructions ought to be plain and natural, so yet majestic. So the florid, elevated, and figurative way is for the patients. For these are begotten in the soul by showing the objects out of their true preparation. So a man is to be cheated into passions, but to be reasoned into truth. So here you have to know all these things about John Dryden. Let us move now to the next slide and see William Wordsworth, as you see here in 1770 up to 1850. William Wordsworth, we can say, espouses a new visions of poetry and the beginnings of radical change in literary theory. The second, his purpose, he notes, is to choose incidents and situations from common life and describe also them in language really used by people in situations. The manner in which we associate idea in a state of excitement. So Wordsworth or William Wordsworth was an English romantic poet who, with Samuel Coleridge, helped to launch the Romantic Age English literature with their joint publications, if I remember, Lyrical Palette in 1798. So William Wordsworth was one of the founder of English Romanticism. We can say again that William Wordsworth was one of the founders of English Romanticism and one its most central figures and important intellects. So he is remembered as a poet of spiritual. You see, we can say that we remember him as a poet of spiritual and intellect. So he is a poet concerned with the human relationship to nature and Farish advocate of using the vocabulary and the speech pattern of common people in poetry. Now, like Aristotle, Sidney, and Pope, Wordsworth concerned himself with the elements and subject matter of literature, but it changed the emphasis. So here, common men and women people his poetry, not kings, queens, and aristocrats, because in humble and rustic life, Wordsworth asserts the poet finds that the essential passions of the heart find a better soil in which they can, I can say, they can attain their maturity and are less under restraint and speak plainer and more emphatic language. So not only does Wordsworth suggest a radical change in subject matter, as you see here, uh, uh, but also dramatically shifts of focus of poetry's proper language. So here, Wordsworth chooses language really used by people, everyday speech, I can say, not the inflated poetic dictions of heroic couplets, complicated rhyme schemes, and dense figures of speech placed in the mouth of the typical 18th century characters. So this is something about the word or the poetics or the style of William Wordsworth, and we will take also in the future later. I'll give you practice songs or poems about or belong to William Wordsworth to be as a practice. So let us here move to P.B. Shelley, as you see, 1792 until 1822. One of the strongest and most vocal voices of a British Romanticism, P.B. Shelley. And Shelley was born in England in 1792, educated at Academy in London. For Shelley, there is nothing more sacred and perfect than poetry. Now, Percy Shelley was one of the major English Romantic poets. American literary critic Harold Bloom describes him as a superb craftsman, a lyric poet without rival, and surely one of the most advanced skeptical intellects ever to write a poem. This is according to American literary critic Harold Bloom. So, a radical in his poetry as well as in his political and social view, Shelley did not achieve fame during his lifetime, but recognition of his achievements in poetry grows steadily following his death, and he became an important influence on subsequent generations of poets, including Browning and Hartley and Yeats. So we can say here, Shelley, for Shelley, there is nothing more scared and perfect than poetry. In this creative theory, the poet is the greatest among all the various kinds of artists because the poet alone can see the future in the present and, as Shelley notes, participates in the eternal, the infinite, and the one becoming more than just an ordinary person. So here, of all the romantic poets, Shelley by far is the greatest devotee of Plato, embracing Plato's beliefs and establishing himself as the voice of new Platonism and British Romanticism. Shelley also wrote prose fictions and quantity of essays on political, social, and philosophical issues. Let us now move to Matthew Arnold, 1822 up to 1888. You see here, Matthew Arnold was an English poet and cultural critic who worked as an inspector of schools. Fundamentals of Arnold's literary criticism is his reapplications of classical criteria to literature, quotes and borrowed ideas from Plato, Aristotle, Longius, and other classical writers pepper his criticism. So here, if I want to talk about Matthew Arnold, I can add also that he was the son of an English educator. His name is Thomas Arnold, and the celebrated his headmasters of rugby school and brother also to both Tom Arnold, literary professor, and also William Delfeld Arnold as novelist and colonial administrator. So Matthew Arnold here has been characterized as a wise writer, a type of writer who punish and instruct the reader on contemporary social issue. He was also an inspector of schools for 35 years and supported the concept of state regulated secondary education. Fundamental of Arnold's literary criticism is his reapplications of classical criteria to literatures. From Aristotle Poetics, for examples, Arnold here adapt his idea that the best poetry is of higher truth and seriousness than history or any other human subjects or activity for that matter. So, like Plato, Arnold believed Arnold believes that literature reflect the society in which it is written and herald its values and concerns. So this is what I want to say about Matthew Arnold in this slide. Now, for Arnold, poetry, not religion, science, or philosophy, is humankind's growing activities. Now, it means that more and more humankind will discover that we have, according to Arnold, we have to turn to poetry to interpret life for us, to console us, to sustain us. Without poetry, our science will appear incomplete, and most of what now passes with us for religion and philosophy will be replaced by agree, truth, and seriousness. So here, Arnold's work as a literary critic began with the 1853 preface to the poems. Arnold here, I can say that Arnold is famous for introducing a methodology of literary criticism, somewhere between the historist approach common to many critics at the time and the personal essay. He often moved quickly and easily from literary subjects to political and social issues. His essays in criticism in about 1865 up to 1888 remain a significant influence on critics to this day, and his uh, brief essay to that collections to the functions of criticism at the present time means is one of the most influential essays written on the role of a critic in identifying and elevating literatures, even while admitting the critical power is of lower rank than the creative So, like a Plato critic, Arnold reaffirmed but likely amends the social role of criticism to create a current of a true and fresh idea. So here, to accomplish his goal, the critic must avoid becoming embroiled in politics or any other activity that would lead to a form of bias for the critic must view society disinterestedly, keeping aloof from the world's mundane affairs. So this is what we can say about Arnold, as you see, and his life. Now let us go to modern literary criticism. First of all, after Arnold, now literary theory and criticism became splintered and more diversified, with no one voice speaking or no one theory tenaciously held by all. At the end of the 19th century, most critics emphasized either a biographical or a historical approach to text, using tense historical interests in a text and Henry James newly articulate theory of the novel. So many critics investigated a text as if it were an embodiment of its authors or historical artifact. So, what, as you see, what follows in the 20th and 21st century is a variety of schools of criticism, with each school asking legitimate and relevant but different questions about text. So most of these schools abandon in the whole text approach to literary study, which investigates, analyzes, and interprets all elements of the artist's situation in favor of concentrating on one or more specific aspects. So this is a brief summary, a brief introductions about modern English literature, modern literary criticism. So we will complete and go later to discuss and explain everything about the modern literary criticism clearly, but slowly and gradually you have to understand all these things and points as you see here from the contents. You have to read also and keep in your mind that John Dryden's, William Wordsworth, B.B. Shelley, Matthew Arnold's modern literary criticism also. You have to read it in order to complete chapter number 2 by these writers. So here we came to the end. We come to the end of this lecture. So let me say now goodbye and see you. Time to say goodbye.